Good evening, grade 12, 2021. The last question. Paper 2, question 6. The end of the Cold War and a new world order, the events of 1989. Let's look at the essay. The collapse of the USSR and the end of the Cold War in 1989 played a significant role in bringing the National Party and the ANC to the negotiating table. That's a statement. Now, if the question reads something like, to what extent do you agree with the statement? Support your answer with relevant evidence. You must take a stand, please. You cannot take your stand. You probably can at the end of your essay. But if you take the stand in your introduction, you immediately form a line of argument, which will make it easier for the marker to see where you're going with this essay and to follow whether you do have a line of argument. So, I use this introductory sentence. Remember, this is mine. You need to formulate yours around it. Okay? I fully agree that the change in international relations brought about by the collapse of the USSR and the end of the Cold War, and that it is positively impacted on the domestic policy of South Africa. So, now you know, I know as a marker, that you as the candidate writing the matric exam agrees with the statement. You cannot now, after your introduction, change and not support your argument that you've raised in paragraph 1 in your introduction. You need to follow that same line of argument. So guys, this is one of the easier essays. Please, if you want to score good marks in paper 2 in an essay, this is the essay that you would want to do because it is straightforward. There's no hidden things here. It's things that we know about. So I'm going to go through it quickly, and we're specifically going to look at the collapse of the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and how it affected South Africa. And this is the question, the crux of this question is, how did it affect the collapse of apartheid in South Africa? So in my introduction, I would already mention, I've mentioned that I agree, and then I would mention the fact that the collapse of the USSR affected South Africa in two ways. Firstly, it changed the attitude of the apartheid government towards negotiations with a liberation movement that they previously saw as a terrorist movement. And secondly, it changed the attitude of the ANC towards negotiating with the apartheid government. And that is what this whole essay is all about. So the collapse of the USSR was the direct result of Mikhail Gorbachev's introduction of perestroika, a free market system, and Glasnost's freedom of the media into the Russian system. That would basically be your introduction. So how did it affect the National Party government, this collapse of communism in the USSR and the Berlin Wall that collapsed all happening in the 1989s, late 89s. The National Party government was strongly anti-communistic. So they believe that what we saw as a liberation organization, that the ANC was a terrorist organization because the ANC and the South African Communist Party worked together. And therefore, the National Party government believed that the USSR controlled the ANC. When communism collapsed, the National Party government no longer had a threat of communism taking over South Africa. So they were more willing and more open to talk to the ANC not as a terrorist organization but as a liberation movement. You must also remember that the National Party were funded by the West. Okay, this is the thing that I'm trying to explain this in my classes to my learners so that they can remember. The Americans hated apartheid. Everybody knew that in those days. They know that America hated apartheid. But the Americans hated communism more. So they supported the apartheid government because they hated communism. So it's a question of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. The apartheid government was also the enemy. But the Russian communists were the bigger enemy. So they made friends with a smaller enemy, if that makes sense to you. The National Party lost their funding from the West because suddenly the West does not see the ANC as a threat anymore. And after 1989, the West actually promoted this whole new world order, and the West started to put pressure on the apartheid government to negotiate with the Liberation Organization. But it also impacted on the ANC. These changes happened worldwide during that time period, and when the USSR collapsed as an entity, it affected liberation movement significantly. The USSR suddenly had problems of its own, so they couldn't support liberation organizations anymore in other countries. They couldn't support the fight of the ANC against the National Party government, and so the ANC had to move its bases from Angola. And especially when an agreement about Namibia was reached, the ANC could move there. So um, military victory seemed more and more less likely to happen for the ANC, and the ANC realized that they won't be able to win this battle because they don't have the weapons or the money from the USSR anymore. And they also were more and more divided about a communist government that they would like to put in place or a capitalistic government that more people were increasingly supporting. And so the ANC were no longer viewed. Mandela, at some stage, when he was released from jail in the 1990s, was openly opposed to this whole idea of nationalization, communism, sort of. And so the ANC were no longer viewed by the West as a tool used by the USSR, and so the Britain and the United States started to support the ANC. It is therefore clear that this collapse of communism and the USSR contributed towards the two major forces, ANC and National Party, to come to the table and negotiate. It also changed the attitude of the West because they now supported liberation organizations and not the apartheid government anymore. And that is how this whole collapse of communism has affected and brought about the collapse, part of the collapse of apartheid in South Africa. I thank you.